Good afternoon, colleague. May I ask distinguished colleagues, friends to take their respective seats so we can try to start. It seems my Swiss watch has already a bit late, and I was instructed by my colleague in my left, the secretary, that this session is much shorter than the last two sessions. So we're expecting to finish by 5:30, so that you all could have a little bit of a coffee break before we come up to the closing session. Well, shall we start? Excellencies, distinguished expert, ladies and gentlemen, once again to bid you all a good afternoon. Now we will go to the third plenary session entitled Ideas for the Future, the Next Steps. I would like to repeat, Ideas for the Future, the Next Steps. So this is a very important session. We have here with us a very distinguished speaker who are going to share their valuable knowledge and ideas. We will first hear from our speakers, and then I will open the floor for questions and comments from participants, just like we did in the last two sessions. I would also like to remind all our speakers here to stay within the 15-minute time limit set by the organizer, so that we have enough time for discussion. I will signal if you are a bit too long by coughing to the microphone. So that means your time is almost up, or should be up. So it's not very diplomatic, but it's much more clear way of doing it. So if you hear my coughing, then it's time for you to wrap up so that we can move to the other speaker. And I was reminded again by the secretary that all participants are encouraged to use the hashtag on the screen above to promote the conference on their social media. Without further ado, our first speaker this afternoon is Mr. Alvaro de Soto, a prominent international mediator who has had a long and distinguished career at the United Nations and a proven track record in conflict resolution in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Pacific. In the 1990s, he brokered successful peace negotiation, which ended decades of civil war in El Salvador. He was also in charge of the talks on Cyprus, which produced a referendum on its future. He served as a special representative on Myanmar and on Western Sahara, and UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, and envoy to the Quartet from 2005 to 2007. There are few people in the world as qualified as Mr. DeSoto to speak on lessons to be learned from the United Nations involvement in the Middle East peace process and peace process elsewhere. The key question is once again, of course, what made those other peace processes work while the Israeli-Palestinian track remains in limbo. It is a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, now and an honor to have you, Mr. DeSoto, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This may well be the first time that I speak in a UN forum without having to adhere to policy or without having to issue a disclaimer since I started my career as a young Peruvian diplomat in 1968. So you will understand that I am not only honored to have been asked to do precisely this, but I'm also delighted at the opportunity to speak without restraints. I've been asked to speak about lessons to be drawn of UN participation in the Middle East peace process and elsewhere. Let me reverse the order and start with a few general reflections on UN peacemaking, and then I will move to the specific, meaning the Middle East. I joined the UN Secretariat as the fifth Secretary General, Javier Pérez de Cuellar, was beginning his decade in office in 1982. I joined him in his office. Now, his decade in office was to culminate in the last 3.5 years of his time in office in a flurry of United Nations peacemaking unparalleled in the 70 years of the existence of the organization, before or since. People tend to dismiss this. They say, well, the Cold War was ending, and so doors began to open, and this became possible for him, and essentially the UN became a sort of a cleaning up machine. This would be slightly inaccurate because it would give the impression that there was some point at which the Cold War ended and all became possible. The ending of the Cold War was actually a process. And the peacemaking of the 3.5 years from mid-88 until the end of 1991 was actually part of that process in solving or helping to solve a number of conflicts. The UN, and specifically the Secretary General, actually helped bring about the end of the Cold War, and don't let anyone tell you anything different. We had a couple of rules during Mr. Pérez de Cuellar's time in office, and he took over in the depths of the Cold War. Let me just say that by way of illustration and reminder for those who are old enough to remember, that at that time the leader of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev, and his foreign minister was Andrei Gromyko, and his ambassador was Yakov Malik. And for the United States, the president was Ronald Reagan, his Secretary of State was Alexander Haig, and his ambassador to the UN was Jeane Kirkpatrick. Need I say more? We had a couple of rules. One of them was, don't jump into empty pools. This may sound slightly frivolous, and it may give the impression that one had a choice. But the Secretary General was determined not to fall into the temptation of offering his good offices for anything that came up. It was essential in his from his perspective to make sure that if the UN Secretary General, as let's say, the last resort in peacemaking, or at least in official multilateral peacemaking, there had to be a certain chance of success. The empty pool, obviously, is a metaphor. One had to ensure not only that there was water in it, but that the temperature was right, that the sky was cloudless, and that there were towels nearby. In other words, one had to choose what one got involved into and gauge things such as the timing, the opportunity, and the ripeness of the conflict for resolution. I will come back to this. A second rule, which Mr. Pérez de Cuellar believed in very deeply, and there is a reason why I'm saying this, so please bear with me, that a third-party effort at conflict resolution, be it mediation or good offices, had to have a certain unity and a certain integrity. Let me say expand a bit first about the empty pools. What I mean to say, and particularly the ripeness aspect, I'm sure that many in this room are familiar with the writings of William Zartman, who has actually theorized the idea that a conflict lends itself more or better to resolution through negotiation if it is ripe. Ripeness being defined as the point when there is a mutually hurting stalemate, meaning that the parties to it come to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that it would be more costly, financially, militarily, politically, to continue the conflict than to negotiate the end of it. Now, this involves a judgment that not all conflicts necessarily lend themselves to third-party conflict resolution efforts. And so the moment that you intervene is of critical importance. And there is not ever sufficient emphasis. You can never emphasize enough how important it is to get the conflict right. Because anyone who ventures to help out in the solution of a conflict and fails may actually be doing damage to the cause of ending that conflict over time. So it has to be very carefully gauged. Secondly, on the unity and integrity of mediation, Mr. Perez de Cuellar had as a policy that if there was already a mediator or facilitator involved in trying to solve a conflict, and he or she was acceptable to the parties, or a group in the same position, that he would not interfere. A typical case was the Central American peace process that, at the time he took over, was raging through 3 conflicts in Central America, and he did not become involved, even though he was receiving considerable encouragement to do so. And he only did so once this group of Latin American countries decided to pull out of it. He believed that if a second volunteer jumps in when another one is already involved, he will only complicate the first one's efforts and facilitate forum shopping. Secondly, he was profoundly skeptical of a notion which was bandied about, particularly in the course of yesterday as well as today, which is collective efforts at the search for solutions to conflict. Now, it's my experience, and I'll be elaborating in the more specific portion of my remarks to this, that collective efforts at mediation tend to blur strategy, if not blunt it, and also tend to dilute and disperse responsibility among those who are part of the collective. And I have seen it happen. And I can provide you with somewhat more specific evidence of it should you need to. Should you be interested in following this up. Now then, he also believed, therefore, and it's kind of a corollary to what I said about ripeness, that just like with fruit or vegetables, throwing them at the wall repeatedly will not bring about ripeness. It may make them soft, but it won't make them ripe or tasty or particularly fruitful. So you have to know when and how to press, lest you devalue the coin. And this has become a bit of a problem over time because of the growth of influence of public opinion, which has the possibility of becoming very active, but tends to tilt in certain direction. For instance, sometimes we will have in train a wartime negotiation, and which has its pros and its cons. But one of the pros that it has is that the pressure from the international community, among others, to find a solution that is durable and sustainable will remain, something which tends to disappear when you reach a ceasefire point, at which stage the Security Council, notoriously fickle, tends to lose interest in it. And public opinion will push you in the direction of humanitarian approaches to conflict, which is one of the issues that are making efforts regarding Syria particularly difficult these days, at a point where the international community or those involved in looking for ways out doesn't seem to be able to make up its mind whether it is looking for humanitarian relief or for an actual solution to the conflict. Now, moving to the specific. The Israeli-Palestine conflict falls into the category of conflicts that can be described as having too much history and too little geography. Or as Churchill might have said, or perhaps didn't, that the parties have more history than they can digest. He may have said that about the Balkans, or he may have said that about Cyprus, but he could also have said it about Israel, Palestine. And I'm very grateful to some of the earlier speakers, and particularly Mr. Stock, who pointed out that third-party efforts is not where one should look for the blame, that there are plenty of reasons inherent to the conflict itself that need to be addressed and aren't addressed, including the transformations that have occurred amidst the parties themselves over the decades. Now, multilateralism as a diplomatic approach, for the reasons I mentioned, can be overrated. Ambassador Malloy referred to some of the drawbacks and actually reached a conclusion on this particular subject. But I think it's crucial, as in this conflict between Israel and Palestine, to acknowledge the imperative of the parties putting themselves in each other's shoes, and trying to see it from their perspective as well. That is ABC. You don't need me to tell you that. But there is no partner, Israel tells us frequently. And Israel uses two arguments which actually weaken each other, but no matter. When there is a flurry of pro-unity activity to try to repair the schism that exists amongst Palestinians, starting with 2006, they react by saying, or at least the current government reacts by saying, that the Palestinians must choose, the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah must choose between making peace with Israel and making peace with Hamas. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And speaking of multilateral approaches, I remember when I first heard of the appearance on the scene of the quartet. I was otherwise engaged on Cyprus at the time. It struck me as a clever idea. And Mr. Stock reminded us today of something that my predecessor, Mr. Larson, used to say about how it brought together the financial capabilities of the European Union, the power of the United States, the historical role of Russia, and the United Nations legitimacy. Now, as I learned not long after I was appointed to the position that I held in Jerusalem and Gaza, the United Nations in 2006, early 2006, by its association with the position that the quartet took after Hamas won the parliamentary elections, actually lost its legitimacy and became involved in a thoroughly uncomfortable position where it was trying to coordinate the work of assistance of the United Nations system of agencies and programs in Gaza that was being carried out in order to try to palliate the negative impact of the policies with which the United Nations was associated as a result of being a member of the quartet. And so it's at that point that I was reminded of Mr. Perez de Cuellar's skepticism regarding collective efforts. And it's only at that point, rather belatedly, I must admit, that I realized that it was probably not a good idea for the United Nations Secretary General to remain as part of the quartet as it had become. The quartet seemed like a good idea at the time, but it had a specific short-term purpose, which was to try to provide a framework within which to draw into the prominent role that it had played for many years, a United Nations administration that was reluctant to become involved. Having achieved that purpose, perhaps that was the time to bring the effort to an end. I've since concluded that actually the UN Secretary General, in order to preserve his special status in global diplomacy, should not be a member of any grouping which he is not the leader of. And if one were to rethink that, and if one had to have it, whether the UN is involved or not, it's better so as not to undermine the need for unity and integrity of mediation efforts, to have a friends system whereby you have a leader and a group of friends, perhaps a contact group. A group of friends may be better because it gives more credit, if it is successful, to those who are in the friendly position. Now, let me just say that where do I see the possibilities for the future other than the ones that I've already hinted at? One is that the parties should need to bring about changes of their own, internal ones. Now, everyone knows that, as Professor Golan was telling us this morning, that Israel has its most right-wing government ever in its history. And that's not likely to change soon or abruptly. If something is going to occur, it's going to occur sharply. It was gradually and over time. We are told, and I'm sure that Yair Hirschfeld will elaborate on this, that there is still a majority in favor of the ingredients that are broadly known as a possible or potential solution to the problem, as embodied in the Geneva Initiative or Oslo or even the Clinton parameters. Perhaps. I retain a certain skepticism, and I believe that those who are polled on this feel that they can be a little bit more forthcoming because they see no prospect of this happening any time in the near future. And that such polls, if there were an agreement actually approaching, might be altered quite significantly. Be that as it may, I think it is worthwhile to consider the slow evolution, the glacier-like pace of events as described, for instance, by Peter Beinart in The Crisis of Zionism, where he speaks of the evolution as generations pass of American Jewish youth, which is not the same as it was in the generation of their parents or their grandparents, some of whom may be Holocaust survivors. There is intermarriage, and they, with some distance, tend to be more understanding of the plight of the Palestinians and more willing to look at it objectively. Considerations like that. There are also studies such as those of Bernard Avishai regarding one of the key areas that explain Israel's spectacular success in the software area, reminding us that this is a very portable industry, and that if things become difficult, in that the narrow waistline of Israel between Nablus and the sea, just a few miles, it can easily be moved to Slovenia or Australia. It almost doesn't matter where in the globe it is. But then there is the remaining Palestinian schism to which I've alluded. Once in a while, there is an effort or an announcement that an effort is going to be made to create a unification movement, and the usual threats come from the Israeli side, if they are actually threats or at least innuendo thereof, and nothing ever seems to actually happen. Now, one gets the sense that Ramallah has given up on a negotiation for a two-state solution, at least for now. And it is certainly not accepting the pleas of Mr. Netanyahu for negotiations without preconditions. A legitimate reaction, given that no preconditions means essentially the acceptance of the status quo, which is unacceptable. Now, if it could only just follow through and take the position of principle and actually create a unity government, and thereby, with all its drawbacks, undermine or weaken the argument according to which there is no unified partner. I can tell you that, for instance, in El Salvador, the unification of the various and disparate groups who were insurging against the state of affairs in that country, unified, it made an enormous difference, probably the difference between success and failure. I will leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. DeSoto, for your valuable analysis and recommendation. And one important part is the throwing vegetable or fruit to the wall many times will not make them ripe. I think I'll use that on many occasions. And once again, our committee is truly grateful for your participation to this conference and for sharing lessons learned from your vast experience in promoting peace on all continents. And now I would like to give to the second speaker this afternoon, which is Mr. Ayman Odeh, head of the Joint Arab List, the third largest faction in the Israeli Knesset. While the practicing lawyer, Mr. Ayman Odeh joined the Hadash party and was elected as its new leader in the run-up to the 2015 Knesset election. Mr. Odeh fights for the right of the Arab community in Israel. And in addition, Mr. Odeh declared his support for the self-determination of the Palestinian people and that establishment of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. He will speak about the role of parliamentarians in support of the peace process. And once again, I would like to remind on my coughing method, so please bear with me if I cough a lot. That shows that it's time for you to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining with us today, sir, and you have the floor.
المناصر الدائم والمثابر للشعب الفلسطيني دكتور نبيل شعث عضو اللجنة المركزية لحركة فتح وممثل الرئيس محمود عباس، دكتور محمود اشتيا عضو اللجنة المركزية لحركة فتح، دكتور رياض منصور سفير فلسطين في الأمم المتحدة، دكتور إبراهيم خريشي المندوب الدائم لدولة فلسطين لدى الأمم المتحدة في جنيف. وأريد أيضا أن أحيي المشاركين الإسرائيليين هنا، اليهود الإسرائيليين، بلتاينسكي وهو مدير عام مبادرة جنيف، السيدة جولان والسيد هيرشفيلد الموجود على المنصة هنا. طبعا أريد أن أشكر لجنة الأمم المتحدة لحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني غير القابلة للتصرف التي نظمت هذا الاجتماع المهم جدا. هذا الاجتماع في غاية الأهمية، وتحضرني هنا الجملة الفارقة لرئيس الشعب الفلسطيني التاريخي ياسر عرفات في الأمم المتحدة العام 1974، حيث قال أن السلام حيث قال أن السلام يبدأ
Just 1 minute. No, it's the whole system. Just
Okay.
1 minute. No, it's okay.
Yes, now you can continue.
أعتذر عما حصل. تحضرني هنا الجملة الفارقة لرئيس الشعب الفلسطيني التاريخي ياسر عرفات حين وقف في الأمم المتحدة في العام 1974 وقال إن السلام العالمي يبدأ من فلسطين. فلسطين هي نقطة فيثاغورس التي ممكن الوقوف عليها من أجل أن يحل السلام على الكرة الأرضية بأسرها. السؤال الأساسي هنا هو ما هو دورنا نحن العرب الفلسطينيين الذين بقينا في وطننا في العام 48 بعد النكبة، والذين نشكل 20% من المواطنين في إسرائيل عموما. ما هو دورنا الميداني والبرلماني؟ قبل عدة أيام قرأت قصة جميلة لأحد كتابنا المبدعين إيميل حبيبي، وهو يقول أنه كان في قبرص وسأله سائق سيارة الأجرة: من أين أنت؟ فأجابه إيميل حبيبي: أنا فلسطيني. فقال له سائق سيارة الأجرة: ماذا يعني فلسطيني؟ في كل العالم أنتم موجودون، من أين أنت بالضبط؟ فأجاب إيميل حبيبي بعد تمهل: أنا فلسطيني إسرائيلي. ويقول إيميل حبيبي أن سائق سيارة الأجرة كاد أن يصطدم بالشجرة بالمقابل، لأن هذه مفارقة أن تكون أيضا فلسطينيا وأيضا أن تكون مواطن في إسرائيل. ولكن هذا الأمر يتطلب أن نعرف أولا من نحن وما هو دورنا. المؤسسة الإسرائيلية حاولت دائما أن تخلق شخصية اسمها العربي الإسرائيلي. من هو العربي الإسرائيلي؟ هو عربي يعرف عن تاريخه القديم ولكن لا يعرف شيئا عن القضية الفلسطينية ولا يتماهى مع الشعب الفلسطيني، وهو ليس إسرائيليا 100%، لأنه فقط اليهودي هو إسرائيلي 100% في دولة تعرف نفسها بأنها دولة اليهود. إذن فهو ليس عربيا 100% وليس إسرائيليا 100%، هو مخلوق مشوه منقوص الانتماء الوطني ومنقوص الانتماء المدني. بالمقابل نحن نريد أن نكون عرب فلسطينيين 100% ونناضل من أجل المواطنة التامة بنسبة 100%، أي هم يقترحون علينا أن نكون منتمين وطنيا جزئيا ومنتمين مدنيا جزئيا، ونحن نريد أن ننتمي وطنيا بشكل كامل وننتمي مدنيا بشكل كامل. إذن فنحن جزء من الشعب العربي الفلسطيني، وفي الوقت ذاته نحن جزء من المواطنين في دولة إسرائيل. نحن نشكل 20% من المواطنين، ونعتقد أن قرار الاحتلال في إسرائيل يتجاوز وزننا، ولكن لا يمكن أن تصل إسرائيل إلى السلام دون الوزن الكمي والنوعي للمواطنين العرب في إسرائيل. هذه هي المعادلة الأولى. المعادلة الثانية، لأننا نشكل 20% فنحن لوحدنا لا نستطيع، ولكن بالشق الآخر بدوننا لا يمكن. من يجب أن يفهم هذه المعادلة؟ نحن يجب أن نفهم أننا لوحدنا لا نستطيع لأننا نشكل 20% فقط، واليسار الإسرائيلي يجب أن يفهم أنه بدوننا لا يمكن. لهذا مطلوب شراكة عربية يهودية من أجل مناهضة الاحتلال وإحلال السلام بين الشعب الفلسطيني وبين دولة إسرائيل. هذا الوزن الكبير للمواطنين العرب هناك من يعرف أنه مؤثر جدا، وعلى رأس هؤلاء العارفين رئيس الحكومة نتنياهو. انظروا إلى هذه المسيرة. نتنياهو كان رئيسا للمعارضة حين كان رابين رئيسا للحكومة بين العام 92 إلى 95، ورابين كان له ائتلاف مكون من 56 عضو، وفي إسرائيل البرلمان مشكل من 120 عضو، يعني أنت بحاجة إلى 61 عضو من أجل أن تقود الحكومة. لرابين كان 56، فهو اعتمد على أصوات المواطنين العرب من أجل أن يصل إلى 61 عضو. فرئيس المعارضة نتنياهو كان يقول: بأي حق العرب يقررون للدولة اليهودية؟ هذا المنطق رافقنا طويلا. في العام 96 بالانتخابات بين بيرس وبين نتنياهو كان الفرق 30,000 صوتا، أي كان العرب يستطيعون أن يقرروا من يكون رئيس حكومة إسرائيل. لهذا في مؤتمر هرتزلية قبل عدة سنوات قال نتنياهو إن الخطر الحقيقي والعميق على دولة إسرائيل ليس الفلسطينيين في الضفة والقطاع، وإنما العرب داخل دولة إسرائيل. قبل الانتخابات الأخيرة نتنياهو رفع نسبة الحسم كي لا نستطيع أن نمثل في البرلمان. جوابنا على ذلك أن أقمنا القائمة المشتركة التي تمثل كل الأحزاب والحركات للمواطنين العرب داخل إسرائيل، واستطعنا أن نجتاز نسبة الحسم. في يوم الانتخابات وقف نتنياهو وقال: أنا أتوجه إلى الجمهور اليهودي وأقول لكم إن المواطنين العرب يذهبون بالحافلات إلى صناديق الاقتراع. بهذا الشكل يحرض على جزء من المواطنين لأنهم لا يريدون إلقاء الحجارة، وإنما يريدون أن يذهبوا إلى صناديق الاقتراع وأن يدلوا بأصواتهم. نتنياهو خطب فقط 7 مرات في الكنيست الحالية. في المرات ال7 حرض ضدنا. مثلا قال أن أعضاء الكنيست العرب يرفعون أعلام داعش إلى هذه الدرجة. وقبل شهرين قرر نتنياهو أن يذهب بقانون خطير للغاية، وهو قانون الإقصاء. ماذا يقول هذا القانون؟ هذا القانون يعطي الحق لأعضاء كنيست أن يخرجوا أعضاء كنيست آخرين من العمل البرلماني. نحن ممثلون من الشعب وليس من أعضاء البرلمان، ومن حق الشعب إقالتنا وليس من حق أعضاء البرلمان. ولكن عندما عجز نتنياهو بكل الوسائل أن يحرض علينا وأن يخرجنا خارج العمل السياسي، لجأ إلى هذا القانون الخطير بأن يخول أعضاء كنيست أن يخرجونا نحن أعضاء الكنيست خارج البرلمان عبر التصويت في البرلمان. لماذا يفعل كل ذلك نتنياهو منذ العام 94 وحتى اليوم كما سردت لكم؟ لأنه يعرف أننا نشكل 20%. في حالة ألقينا كل وزننا في العمل السياسي في إسرائيل، ليس فقط أنه هو واليمين لن يبقيا في الحكومة، وإنما نحن قادرون إلى جانب زملاء وقوى ديمقراطية يهودية أن ندفع باتجاه السلام وباتجاه المساواة. لهذا فهو يعادي هؤلاء المواطنين العرب أيضا أيديولوجيا، ولكن أيضا سياسيا انتهازيا، من أجل إخراجنا خارج دائرة الشرعية والتأثير في إسرائيل. من أجل أن ندفع نحن العملية السلمية للأمام فنحن نحتاج ثلاثا. نحن نحتاج أن نرفع نسبة التصويت لدينا. نحن أخص المواطنين العرب نصوت بنسبة 63%، واليهود يصوتون بنسبة 73%. لا يوجد أي سبب أن لا نرفع نسبة التصويت لدينا إلى أكثر من 75% كما كانت في سنوات التسعينيات، في سنوات اتفاق أوسلو. الأمر الثاني أن نناضل من أجل شرعيتنا كمواطنين كاملي الحقوق في وطننا الذي لا وطن لنا سواه. فإخراجنا خارج دائرة الشرعية والعمل على شيطنة المواطنين العرب ووضعهم خارج كل معادلة سياسية هدفها أن يستمر اليمين في الحكم وأن تستمر الحكومة المعادية للسلام. لهذا فالمعركة من أجل شرعيتنا كمواطنين كاملين هي البند الثاني في مساهمتنا أيضا مدنيا وأيضا برلمانيا في دفع العملية السلمية. العامل الثالث تعزيز الشراكة العربية اليهودية. نحن نريد أن نناضل جنبا إلى جنب، عرب ويهود ديمقراطيين معا. نحن كعرب علينا أن ندرك بأننا لوحدنا لا نستطيع، وعلى اليهود الديمقراطيين أن يفهموا أنه بدوننا لا يمكن أبدا. لهذا فالمعركة على شرعية المواطنين العرب هي ليست معركتنا نحن فقط، وإنما معركة كل مواطن يريد المواطنة، يريد البعد المدني، البعد الديمقراطي، ويريد أن يطور عملية السلام إلى الأمام. في نهاية المطاف كل احتلال يزول بعوامل ثلاث. أولا المقاومة، وقيادة الشعب الفلسطيني اختارت المقاومة السلمية، وهي لها كل الحق أن تختار سبل المقاومة. العامل الثاني هو الرأي العام داخل الدولة التي تمارس الاحتلال. والعامل الثالث هو البعد الدولي. نحن موجودون في العامل الثاني، وهو الرأي العام داخل الدولة التي تمارس الاحتلال، ونحن نريد أن نضع كل وزننا في هذا المعترك، مساهمة منا في إنهاء هذا الاحتلال البغيض. في نهاية المطاف هذا الاحتلال يحتل الشعب الفلسطيني مباشرة، ولكنه أيضا يحتل الشعب الإسرائيلي مداورة. هذا الاحتلال يسيء إلى الشعبين، ليس فقط بالبعد الأخلاقي القيمي، هو يسيء ضد المجتمع الإسرائيلي أيضا ماديا، بدلا من وضع الأموال في الاحتلال، في الاستيطان، في الحرب، فيما يسمى بالأمن، تضع لصالح الطبقات الضعيفة، لصالح الناس. هو يسيء للمرأة في إسرائيل، الحرب يقوي من الرجل ومكانة الرجل على حساب المرأة. الاحتلال يعزز من العنف أيضا على حساب المرأة. الاحتلال يجعل الأوضاع الاقتصادية لدينا صعبة أيضا على حساب المرأة. ونحن أيضا كمواطنين عرب طالما بقينا جزءا من الشعب الفلسطيني وجزءا من المواطنين في إسرائيل، فنحن بين المطرقة والسدان في حالة الاحتلال. كلنا رأينا في حالات الانفراج كمرحلة أوسلو كيف أن وضعنا المدني تحسن، وكلنا رأينا في أوضاع ملتهبة كما كانت في الأشهر الأخيرة كيف أن وضعنا المدني يسوء. لهذا فنحن أصحاب مصلحة مباشرة بإنهاء هذا الاحتلال البغيض. شاعرنا الجميل توفيق زيات قال مرة: مأساتي التي أحيا نصيبي من مآسيكم، لأننا نتعلق جدليا بقضية شعبنا الكبرى، قضية الشعب الفلسطيني. لهذا يجب تحرير الشعبين من هذا الاحتلال المجرم. شكرا.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Odeh, for his inspiring speech and his commitment to the Palestinian right. The committee has a long-standing partnership with parliamentarians and the IPU, and certainly supports their action in favor of two states living in peace and security. I think there are many points that we have alluded to. And now let's continue with our third speaker in this afternoon, which is Professor Yair Hirschfeld. I hope I pronounced it right. Senior lecturer at the University of Haifa. He played a decisive role in establishing back channels between Palestinian and Israeli leaders, thereby assisting in the promotion of the Israeli-Palestinian negotiating process and the Oslo Accords. He has written extensively on Track 2 diplomacy, which is the subject of today's presentation, and is also extremely timely. When official negotiations are stalled, Track 2 certainly can play a catalytic role. We are once again honored to have you, sir, and of course you remind all once again 15 minutes and you have the floor. Thank you.
Many thanks to the chairman, many thanks for inviting me to this important forum, and many thanks for Ayman Odeh for its very important presentation. I want to speak about, have four things. I want to speak about Track 2 and what we, the Israeli potential peace camp, can do, what we can rely on. I'll make 7 points on this. Then we will tell you what we cannot do, and then what cannot be done, and then I'll have some additional remarks in order to finalize. But in order to understand Track 2, let me quickly quote the definition given in Foreign Policy in 1981. Track 2 is a specific kind of informal diplomacy in which non-officials, academic scholars, retired civil and military officials, public figures and social activists engage in dialogue with the aim of conflict resolution and confidence building. The major task of Track 2 diplomacy, and now please listen, is to assist the official negotiating tracks known as Track 1 diplomacy to succeed. So Track 2 diplomacy is not creating, it's not an independent government of itself who replaces the entire system. Track 2 diplomacy, in a way, has either to work with the government or definitely see to it that you can build a supportive coalition in order to move forward. And I believe this is very important. In order to understand the Israeli situation, you just heard that in the present Israeli parliament, you have a majority for a two-state solution. And you have an Israeli government that does not represent the Israeli consensus. You have a leader, Mr. Netanyahu, who is not a leader but a major, very effective and very capable political manager. And he has built a coalition with Beit HaYehudi, with the Jewish Home, which he's dependent on them. His government is almost fully dependent on them. And the Jewish Home is dependent on the right wing of the right wing. So we have in effect, a government that represents the very right wing of Israeli society. It doesn't represent the Israeli people and the majority of the Israeli people. And this is where Track 2 policy has to come into, to see how do we build a coalition that can get us away from these right-wing nationalists or semi-fascists, and how can we move forward. And I will tell you that there are 7 activities that we are engaged in and that we have to promote, and we have to promote at the same time all of them together and sequentially. And we have to look into these 7 activities, and these are the 7 activities we can do, and we can rebuild the peace camp if we do it cleverly. Now let me tell you where we have been successful. Well, maybe not enough successful, but we have the way it works. The way it works is, I'll tell you, in 2008, we had the former Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Israeli Ministry of Finance, David Podet, who came out with a presentation saying it is Israel's economic and financial interest to have a strong Israeli-Arab economic development. And we have to work on Israeli interests. And we cannot go against Israeli interests. Now, this has been in 2008. this government, this right-wing government, has in 2015 or 16 signed on budgetary change that is a dramatic change in a cooperation between Ayman Odeh and our Minister of Finance, who does not belong to the radical right, but is actually looking for a way out of the quagmire. And there's a major contribution to see how we create cooperation and Jewish-Arab cooperation together. And the truth is that on all social and economic issues, we have a common interest, and you have to build joint coalitions on this every day, and there are many things we can do together. This goes into the religious parties too. On some of the social and economic issues, there's common ground between Ayman Odeh on one side and Shas on the other side and some other ones. And it is a very important lever that we have to work on. And now I'll take you to the second point because I have little time. Also, this will be good looking into more. The second activity we're engaged in is to build the structure, the organizational structure of a peace camp. And there are two activities going on that are very, very important. The one activity is going on, and we've worked for the last 7-8 months on developing the structure, and it's coming out in the next 2 weeks, and will be very active in the next 2 weeks. It is called an organization that is called Darkeinu, whatever this is in English, this is our way. We have done, not me down by the way, but there's been a lot of change. How do you look into, how do you create a majority, a coalition majority with support of the people and in the Knesset in order to move forwards to a two-state solution? They have had focus groups, and the focus groups, there will be a slogan, let's speak about the Israel's moderate majority, not the radicals on the right, not the left-wing people detached from reality, but the center, the big center who want a two-state solution and who want a moderate Israel that is constructive. This Darkeinu, it's going to, the idea is to have a mass movement, maybe too much, but to have him all over Israel, Jews and Arabs together, to have everywhere people we are paying, even have members going everywhere. And the hope is that we will have in the coming 8 to 10 months, we'll have 200,000, 300,000 people actually working on the ground. And there's a lot of activity going on. I believe it can be very successful. They are speaking very much to the right wing. They are speaking very much to people like Gidon Sar. They're definitely speaking to Kahlon. They're moving into the right wing and saying we have to marginalize the radical right wing. We don't have to talk to the unrealistic left-wingers, but we have to see how we create a very substantial common ground. Now, there is another issue where there's an Israeli interest. You know, Neil Kinnock once told me, Yair, government is all about reassuring the people. Now, reassuring the people, you have to reassure the people, means that we have, as a peace camp, Jews and Arabs together, to fight for the interests of the State of Israel. The interest of the State of Israel is a prosperous, successful, economic Palestinian entity, a Palestinian state. We have to take care that there will be a possibility to develop serious economic development in the West Bank and Gaza. And we have a lot of support in the Knesset and outside the Knesset for this thing. Netanyahu has spoke about economic peace, and the Palestinians have rejected that and have made it easy for Netanyahu to keep it as a gimmick. But you have never tested him, you never gave us the possibility to say what it means. Before that, yesterday, it was said that if there would be infrastructure, road, railway networks, access and movement, electricity, solar energy by the Chinese, others, this would have to go deeply into Area C. Has to go deeply into areas. There's no question that without Area C, there cannot be substantial economic development. There cannot be substantial economic development in Palestine. Now, without economic development in Palestine, this is going to hurt the State of Israel and Israeli interests. And we can fight for it, and we want you to give us the opportunity to fight with you, together with you. And not only say economic peace, we reject it. And So this is the third thing that we can work together and we can cooperate on that. And water, by the way, is one of the issues that this has to do with it. The next thing we have to do is, it has been rightly said yesterday that the State of Israel has not finally committed itself to a two-state solution. Although you have a majority in Israel who wants a two-state solution. We have to have a dialogue with you. We have to have an understanding with you. How do we get the Israeli parliament to decide to vote in favor of two-state solution? It's not going to be easy. How do we move ahead towards a process where we will recognize that the only outcome of negotiations can be a two-state solution and no other one? It will be a major change. It will be a major step forward, and we have to move along that side. It is not one-sided that you can say you have to recognize us without negotiations. It has to be 67 lines without negotiations. It has to be part of a dialogue, because there's very serious Israeli interests, also for Jews and Arabs together, and you have to understand that they're very serious interests, and we have to speak about it, and we have to move forward on that. The next point is, and I believe that the Israeli commitment, the real only sequential thing is between this point 4 of commitment for two-state solution and point 5. If we have the Israeli Knesset and the government a commitment to a two-state solution, and there's a recognition that the outcome of negotiations can only be a full two-state solution, we have to see how we get international and substantial regional support. And there are two instruments of getting substantial international and regional support. And we spoke about both of them. You may not like one of them. There are some Israelis have difficulties with the other of them, but they are both very important, and they need a dialogue how to move ahead. And from my point of view, the first instrument is the roadmap. We have all committed to the roadmap. The international community, the Israeli government has had 14 reservations on the roadmap. The international community says, whatever reservations, we don't recognize your reservations. You may have reservations, and the international community can say, we don't recognize your reservations. But we have to move along on the roadmap, and we have to see how we move along it. If you've got fears on the roadmap, we have to speak about the fears and how we take care of it. But we cannot say the roadmap doesn't exist. It is a very important document of the international community. You have UN decisions that oblige us to go along with it. Your government has accepted the roadmap legally, and we have to see how we make it happen. And it has to go together with an understanding, how do we move together in the Arab Peace Initiative? There's no question that the Arab Peace Initiative is a very, very important instrument that has to get Arab regional support from Egypt, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf states, in order for the political process. Ambassador Malloy spoke about the multilaterals. I think the multilaterals are a bad and a good example. The multilaterals take care of the interests of everybody. We need the support. We need the support of the Arab world in order to see how we lead to a two-state solution. How we work together on security in cooperation with Israel and the Palestinians, and how do we work together on creating a successful, prosperous, and contiguous state of Palestine. And the Arab world has a very great interest in making this happen. Egypt is taking probably a very, very important leadership, and we have to encourage Egypt to take this leadership. And there's Saeb Eckart and Riyad al-Malki have not come to this meeting because they are meeting the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs in order to see how to move forward. And there may be tough things the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs is telling President Abbas, but the Egyptian leadership will be very important as part of a wider understanding. Well, this is point 5. Now, point 6, and let me a little bit more on point 6. There will never be legitimacy for a two-state solution if we do ignore the fact that both societies, Israeli society and Palestinian society, are traditional and religious. I tell the story of the 15 years meeting of Madrid, when we were received, Israeli and Palestinian delegation, by Her Majesty the King of Spain and the Queen of Spain. And when they served to both delegations pork, and we had no difficulties eating it. We are not representative of neither all of the Palestinian people or nor of the Israeli people. We need religious legitimacy for doing it. I'm not religious, but I can tell you that I have, for 3 years, I am in a dialogue with the most radical right-wing Israeli rabbis from Merkaz Arav, if you know what that is. And I've told them, I've worked 35 years for two-state solution. I've worked 35 years that my grandchildren, I have 9 so far, that my grandchildren can live in dignity in a stable and secure and prosperous state besides the with together and besides the Palestinians. You have successfully failed my activities. Now it's your task to come out and do something constructive. And they and said, I want you to come out with a religious way to peace, but you have to go through five tests. Test number 1, the people I represent in Israel. The people I represent in Israel, and this includes also, I don't represent the Israeli Arab, but I represent today a minority of the Israeli people. You have to convince us that this is not against us. You have to convince us that this is in support of Israeli security. You have to convince us that this is in support of our relations with the wider world, the United States, and this. And you have to support this is in support of the region and with the Palestinians. And if you do that, I will go along with the way whatever you say. We will call it religious peace. And their answer was very interesting. And I want you to understand their answer. Their answer was saying, no, we think there are 2 options. We want your option, our option. We'll put them both to tests. We will test you as you will test us. And then they said, please look at the, we see General Amidror, who's against the two-state solution. We see General Amidror as our guiding force, because he's a general and he understands things they don't understand. And General Amidror put a paper on the table where he's got 3 no's. And I want to be aware of that 3 no's. He's got 3 no against disenfranchising the Palestinians either in Israel or on the West Bank in order to get a one-state solution on 3 different ways. He's against annexation of Area C, and he is, and listen carefully, he is against expansion of settlements. He's not for total settlement freeze, but he's against expansion of settlements. This is a basis for a dialogue. This is a basis for a dialogue, and we have to listen carefully to them, and we have to bring them into our, to see how we create the legitimacy together with them to build a coalition that makes sense and can get us to a two-state solution. And the 7th part, the 7th we have to work on is probably the most difficult one. It's the most difficult one for you, it's the most difficult one for us. In order to reach a two-state solution, we will have to evacuate settlers from their homes. And anybody who tells you you can evacuate 140,000 people or 20,000 families has no idea what he's saying. Now, we had 3 different groups of settlers. There is about 25% or 30% who want a two-state solution and are willing to move out of their homes. I wrote a book together with the Secretary General of the Settlers Movement. We went to the president at that time, and he said, I'm willing to move out of the home in order to get a two-state solution. So you've got 25-30% of them. You've got about 40% who are undecided, and you've got 30% will never get on their side. In order to reach a two-state solution, we need to have an understanding how do we work with these settlers and how do we get the support of them in order to get a majority in the Knesset. Otherwise, we'll never have it. Otherwise, we'll never get stuck. Now, this is not an easy thing. This is not an easy thing. My sense is if we create the reality of a prosperous Palestinian understanding, if we create a commitment of a two-state solution of the Knesset, if we create reality on the ground, if we create a religious dialogue, we create a situation where the settlers are seeing they have to deal with reality and they have to come to terms with the reality. And then we can work with them. Now, this is not an easy job to do, but it is the only way we on the Israeli side can help to work together with you and together on the Israeli side how to move forward or moving ahead. Now let me tell you what we cannot do. Okay, you don't want me to speak, I can close. You can talk to yourself and I can leave immediately, it's no difficulty. But you didn't tell the chair. Now I tell you what we cannot do. There is no Israeli government. There's no Israeli government, there will be no Israeli government, which will make an upfront commitment to move 20,000 families out of their homes. It doesn't exist. And if anybody believes seriously, as has been done this morning, if anybody believes seriously that by sanctions you can ask the international community to put sanctions upon Israel and not reassure the things, but tell the people that they are wrong, and that by sanctions you don't take care of Israeli interests, but you go against Israeli, by sanctions you will win the elections. You have no idea of how to win elections. Nobody can win elections by actually asking for sanctions and saying, let us punish us. So we have to be aware that certain things are wishful thinking and are detached from reality. And we also have to be aware that there will never be a Palestinian state without negotiations. Now let me speak quickly about the difficulties on both sides. Both Israelis and Palestinians, and I'll give you the analytical explanation, Israelis and Palestinians are both arrogant and afraid. And the arrogance and fear of both sides is very, very dangerous. And both are arrogant and afraid because what I call there's a double, very dangerous asymmetry. We Israelis believe, and you are afraid of it, that's the reason of your fear, that we are stronger than you are. But you believe, and with some reason, that you're the majority in the Middle East. You're the majority in the Middle East, and therefore we should be afraid of you. And therefore you have also certain arrogance, and we have a certain fear. And the mutual arrogance and fear, this double asymmetry, is the major reason for the deadlock that has kept us not moving forward. Because you will not give in to anything we say, and we don't give in to you saying, and we are deadlocked on this. If we don't overcome this, we're in big, forgive me, big difficulties, big shit. Now, I want to tell you something that is important. Yesterday you saw, and today you saw, that the Palestinians have today the key to the Arab world for Israel. You do have the key. Everything you heard yesterday and today says that you have the key. But but if you oppose, I'm already finishing. If you oppose any movement forward, and you don't make it possible for the Israeli majority to move along in a dialogue with you, in the end, you will have to form a coalition with the worst groups in the Middle East. And in that case, you have a serious danger that we will be able to work with Turkey, to work with the Arab states, with other states against you, and you will lose the key on that. And we have to work together. It is important that you will have the key. You must be the opener, the gate opener for us to the Arab world. But we have to make it possible that you can do it. And if I can close with two personal remarks. One is on, I just was told that in the Quran, and I'm not it says that we all are on one ship, and on one ship we have to work together and take care of the needs of everybody. And this is a very important guiding position, and let me tell you something else, which is the position of my granddaughter. My granddaughter told me something which I was shocked and upset. He said, yeah, Grandpa, you grew up after the Holocaust and the establishment of the state of Israel in an atmosphere of optimism. She's born 1999. She's 17 years old. My generation, the generation of my granddaughter, grew up after the failure of the peace process and under terror and this. We don't have optimism, we have pessimism. You have to give us hope and legitimacy. That is what it's all about. Let us do it. Thank you.
I thank Professor Hirschfeld for his insightful presentation on Track to Diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with our discussion, I would like to welcome our last but very important speaker of this session, which is Mr. Eckhard Volkmann. He is the Deputy Director of the Inclusive Peace and Transition Initiative based in Geneva. Mr. Volkmann managed large-scale civil society peace-building programs, provided advice on peace, conflict, and fragile contexts, women, peace, and security, which is Resolution 1325, regional integration and trade negotiation, and developed policies and operational strategies in these areas. He has an expertise in the Middle East and will enlighten us on the particular role of civil society in support of the peace processes. It is a pleasure and honor to have you with us, sir, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honor being here. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been introduced as having expertise in the Middle East. I have previous speakers who have many more years than I do and a lot more experience from getting to peace themselves. I briefly want to introduce to you what we at the IPTI, the Inclusive Peace and Transition Initiative, do. Because it is not so much that we study the regional processes in themselves, but we rather try and compare them to each other. We have large data sets of different peace processes, of negotiations as well as post-negotiation processes that we compare to each other, and we try to assess what works in these processes and what doesn't work. With this research-based analysis, we advise different entities, governments, international NGOs, the United Nations, and even in some cases private foundations. And so far we are not claiming that we are the Middle East experts or that we are experts for the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, but that we still have items to contribute which may be relevant to the current situation. Our research is based on two larger and long-year research projects. One is called the Civil Society in Peace Processes, which is directly linked to what I will introduce to you today. Another one is Broadening Participation in Political Negotiations, which I find after the discussions in the last 2 days also a relevant issue, maybe to the current situation and maybe with a perspective also to the French initiative. This research is like 10 years old, conducted by Dr. Tanja Paffenholz here in Geneva at the Graduate Institute, where we form a center. Certainly, our comparative approach only works if we apply that to the context in which we advise. And I briefly want to share my very rough observations of this context, how we could interpret it. And maybe give you a brief introduction of what the functions of civil society are in peace processes as we have noticed them in the cases that we studied. The functions that we see where civil society can contribute to success of peace processes would be protection of violence, which is an issue currently also in Israel and Palestine, as we observe. The monitoring of human rights situations, but also the monitoring of implementation, which I heard on several times here, is also an issue in the agreements between Israel and Palestine. Advocacy calling for political will was something that was intensely discussed here. Socialization and intergroup social cohesion are important functions in coming to terms with each other. Facilitation of dialogue, as you just introduced it, Mr. Hirschfeld. And of course also in some cases, specifically in poorer, fragile states, also the contribution of service what then can be the challenges in the current situation for civil society engagement? That again brings me back to the context as we observe it currently. I think there's specifically 3 items currently that characterize the current situation, and that is the stalemate, the lack of political will, non-implementation of former agreements, I think, are the most important ones, and with the result of an increasing level of violence. What happens with civil society in such situations? The sad thing is that often we observe that civil society is often supported from the international community specifically, without a sufficient strategy, without really asking why we want to engage with civil society, but rather only on trying to distract from the lack of political will, engaging into activities and rather asking the how question than why civil society is engaged in peace processes. But then again, what can we do with civil society currently? We can certainly broaden the dialogue in comparison to what we experienced. Our observation is that often, specifically the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is always negotiated with all the force of the international community, with all the larger powers. This has been so during the Cold War and even afterwards. And one often has the impression that specifically track 3, track 2 get lost in that power game. Civil society can play an important role in order to broaden the dialogues, broaden the negotiations, and come to solutions that may otherwise not be heard. For that, we can provide by now systematic process design and also clear selection criteria of whom to bring to the table or how to organize voices around the table. Until now, this seems to us is rather a very exclusive process in the international arena, and less one that also hears the weaker and the marginalized voices, which are also relevant for coming to terms. We have seen attempts for people-to-people processes, track 2, problem-solving workshops, but very little systematic design of an inclusive process, which we find is an important issue to bring into the new initiative. A point in case may be the, I think, 3-day-old agreement in Colombia, from which we know that the participation of the military and women were success factors that clearly contributed to the agreement. Also, we know that the Gender Commission that has been established may also play a very important role in monitoring the implementation of the agreement, which then will also contribute to the sustainability of agreements. Another thing that is currently possible probably for civil society is advocacy, promotion of the political will, and also attaching that to the international community. Quite a number of very strong civil society organizations are very strongly linked to international NGOs, which do create some lobbying in the international arena, which we find is also very conducive to promote the political will. And then, as I've indicated in the beginning, protection of violence is something that is obviously currently an issue. Accompanying of human rights observers is a possible instrument in this regard. And the combination of the protection function and the lobbying function, the advocacy function, has proven to be very successful. We can analyze combination of the functions of civil society, and we see that oftentimes the combination of such functions are those that provide most effect. What is it that we in this phase then think is probably good to do? We think that we could engage in a systematic analysis of the context, of the phase that we are currently in. It is a very complex context. To me, this seems as a window of opportunity. There would be the French initiative that has potential if the timing is correct, as I understood Mr. Steyer and Mr. Scharf specifically. If the timing is perfect, then we would have enough opportunity for an analysis of the phases, because we know which of the functions have most success in which phases. Then also an analysis of exactly those functions that we currently need most. I have indicated that the level of violence is something that we are pretty concerned of. And then, in order to overcome, again, the stalemate and the lack of political will of larger international community agents, advocacy probably currently is one of the strongest functions that could be played on both sides. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll close, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation on the key role of civil society in the peace process, and you have provided some viewpoints on data. And certainly, once again, I would like to express the committee's sincere appreciation for your participation in this conference. And I think there are many food of thought that we have alluded to. And now we are ready to start our discussion. Like previous session, participants are welcome to ask questions or make comments on the presentation that they have heard this afternoon. We shall take a few comments and questions from the audience at a time. Then our speakers will have the opportunity to respond, and we shall continue on like this. Please introduce yourself at the beginning and make your intervention as brief as possible. Time slot, we have quite limited time. So with that, I would like to open the floor for, I believe there's a modern technology, Mr. Steif. I think you can, is it working, the system? Yeah, well, you push it? Yeah. Okay, you can push your, that's the old way of doing it. Now you have to push the button thing, but I give you the floor, Mr. Steif. You have pushed the button? Push the button. Yeah, that's the new technology. Yes, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 points to make, one to Mr. DeSoto and the other to Ayman, and I would like to congratulate Mr. Volkmann on his work and his organization as well. On the issue of Mr. DeSoto, on the issue of the third party, it has always been the position of the Palestinian leadership to really engage a third party in the negotiations. The problem is the engagement of the third party. The third party never knew what sort of terms of reference that it does dictate its work. For example, when you ask the Americans, what is your role in the whole of the process? Are you mediators? Are you honest brokers? Are you facilitators? And what are you? Even now the French, what is it that France really is doing? Is France just simply holding a conference? Are the French facilitators? Are they mediators? Are they brokers? So the issue of the third party, which we very much are interested in, and we were very hopeful that the engagement of Mr. Martin Indyk, when he was appointed as an American envoy to the peace process, having the United States as a shepherd of the process, the Israeli delegation never allowed Martin Indyk to be in the room. I was there for about 6 months, and we wanted a third party to be present because the relationship on the negotiating table is asymmetrical relationship. And in order for you to correct this imbalance of the relationship, you need a third party to correct the imbalance. Having certain mediators who are themselves are imbalanced, they make the imbalance more imbalanced. And so the third party engagement is not necessarily always useful unless it is exactly defined well with the clear terms of reference what is the mandate of this third party. That's one point. I will not take much time, but I would like to address the other point to my brother and friend, member of Knesset, Ayman Odeh. The Israeli delegation and the negotiations have presented additional final status issue. The Palestinian-Israeli final status issues for negotiations are borders, refugees, security, water, and Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, the Israeli delegation came up with adding additional point, which is asking the Palestinians to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The Palestinian delegation, including myself, fully and totally rejected this sort of a new formulation of us to recognize Israel as a state. And we said, let Israel call itself whatever it wants. Let Netanyahu send a letter to the United Nations and say, from now on, there are two religious states in the region, the Islamic State of Iran and the Jewish State of Israel. It's up to you to call yourself whatever you want, but don't ask me to recognize. So from our side, we fully and totally rejected this to be a condition on us to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. I would like to ask you, my dear brother and friend Ayman, what does it mean to you, this issue of imposition Israel as a Jewish state on the Palestinians inside Israel? Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Nabil Shah. You have the floor, sir.
I suppose the only clear role of a third party, my brother Steye, was the Norwegian role, which Mr. Hirschfeld played an important role. Because the Norwegians really never overestimated their ability to influence the parties. They felt that their work is really purely a facilitating opportunity with secrecy, comfort, and loving care. And the two parties should really do their best to reach a solution, which is totally different from the role of the Americans. I mean, the Americans are the strategic ally of Israel. At the time, they were the owners of the universe, and they really could play the role they want to, define the role they saw perfect for themselves. It's a totally different game when the third party is somebody like the United States or it is somebody like Norway. I mean, there's two models of the party. But my feeling is this going into a new world in which an international party plays a role, hopefully with more emphasis on international law, hopefully with more lessons gained from earlier failures and experiences. It might, and this is why we went to support the French initiative. We're not really so sure so far whether the French can carry it out. We don't know exactly what are the rules of the game. I mean, the rules are going to be fashioned in the coming meeting, and maybe in the meeting in September alongside the General Assembly meeting and so on. It's not very clear. But one thing attracted us, namely an international forum rather than a one country intervention, particularly one like the United States. And we felt that it's a reflection of what's happening to the world, that the world itself is moving towards a multipolar world, and therefore this is an opportunity to escape the stultifying role of the Americans when they wanted to be stultifying. But really I have other questions to Mr. Hirschfeld. I mean, really, I thought that at times you were really dreaming. I mean, you were talking about actions that you can play in Israel, claiming that the majority of Israelis are for a two-state solution, claiming that Israelis see it to their interest to develop the Palestinian Arab economy within Israel, hoping, feeling, stating that it's also in the interest of Israel to develop economically the West Bank. Well, I mean, all of this is not happening at all. I mean, what is happening is further exploitation of the occupied territory, and particularly the West Bank, and the draconian siege of part of it, which is Gaza, and the total separation of the economies of Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, and almost a total takeover of Area C, a total piracy over the water, total control of the borders, of the economy. I mean, what I'm seeing is the worst type of colonial exploitation I've ever seen. And I've studied history quite well. This is really an unbelievable situation, moving gradually into a very straight apartheid type of society. So I hope your dreams, maybe you can give me a little bit more concrete actions about who is it in Israel that, and why is it that the majority of Israelis want a two-state solution, but they are working entirely from the concept of a Jewish state, which is really addressed to taking Nablus, Hebron, and Jerusalem, and not to emphasize Jaffa, Haifa, and Akka. I mean, you're really talking about an ideology in Israel today which is addressed as taking over the West Bank and not as developing a two-state solution. I don't see it. I'm not so sure. I mean, your recommendations are very interesting. Don't touch the settlers. No Israeli government can get the settlers out of their homes. But you said nothing about preventing even further settlers from creating that kind of status quo that you cannot change. So by the time we reach an agreement, the settlers will have redoubled again. And in fact, there are already 400,000 of them in Area C to 100,000 Palestinians in Area C. And therefore, you cannot touch what had happened. It's a status quo that you cannot touch. But what is happening continues to happen. I.e., look, every year there is a maximization of settlers and their control of the country. Secondly, you cannot get a state without negotiations. Well, obviously, we are not thinking of armed struggle in order to liberate Palestine, and therefore we admit there has to be a negotiations. But the question is, negotiation with whom? I mean, you feel that you have a majority. Don't you dare impose sanctions against us. Okay? So we'll use love, and we'll kiss you out of life, maybe. But this is the kind of pressure that we should use. Overindulgence in what you want, but don't you ever touch us. We don't want to go back to armed struggle, Mr. Hirschfeld. And therefore, the only way we have is to put some sanctions in order to get you out and make you move in the direction of a solution. And finally, you said really nothing about the kind of future. Where are you going to get what you want from that Israeli kind of government that rules today Israel? I wish you happy dreams, Mr. Hirschfeld. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to remind, I think I'm going back to my coughing method again, if a little bit long in the presentation. Because I see so many. There's Cuba, my good friend, the Palestinian ambassador, Riyad Mansour. There are two NGO on the what is this, west or east, in the back, in the back, and also South Africa. South Africa is there. All right. If could you all kindly please be quite brief and to the point, so that we can have time for otherwise I will be coughing a lot. So Cuba first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have listened carefully to the presentations made on the different initiatives that have been developed with a view of moving towards a lasting solution to the conflict in the Middle East, and in particular, the Palestinian problem. We will also continue studying with interest the latest actions and visions set out here on the next possible steps. In this session, we also have dedicated time to mention other experiences that might be useful. We believe that if there is a political will, peace processes can really move forward. A few days ago, the world could see this with the signing of the historic agreement on bilateral and definitive ceasefire achieved by the parties in conflict in Colombia, already mentioned by Mr. Volkmann, I think. With this step, the declaration of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, launched by the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, was consolidated. Unfortunately, this is a condition that remains a longing for the Middle East. The Colombian Agreement is the latest example of what we can achieve if the parties act in accordance with international law, respecting the United Nations Charter, and putting in its rightful place the national realities with a constructive spirit and dialogue. Mr. Chairman, Cuba reiterates the importance of the fact that a peace process in the Middle East will only be fair and sustainable if, among its principles, include, first, the acknowledgement of the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of the State of Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem. Second, the demand for immediate cessation of Israel's military occupation of the Palestinian and other Arab territories. Third, the full stop of the construction and expansion of illegal Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory. Next, the promotion of the full implementation of the Geneva Convention on the Protection of Civilians in Time of War of 1949 in the Palestinian and Arab territories occupied by Israel. Next, the solution of the adverse situation of Palestinian refugees in accordance with the rules and principles of international law and relevant UN resolutions. Next, the requirement that the occupying power accounts for the war crimes, human rights violations, and collective punishment committed against the Palestinian people, and the support to the Special Committee to keep its work until the complete end of the Israeli occupation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and other occupied Arab territories by Israel since 1967. Mr. Chairman, only the recognition of the legitimate and inalienable rights of the Palestinian people will allow the start of a meaningful political process that will lead to a sustainable peace in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you for not letting me coughing again. Can I now give the floor to Ambassador Riyad Mansour? Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want also to express our gratitude and thanks to the presenters. One of them is an old good friend, Alvaro. I am delighted that he is with us and shared with us very important ideas. And also I am especially honored that my brother Ayman Odeh, whom we tried to introduce him, to give him audience in contributing his outstanding, principled, clear thoughts to the international community and to our committee in the conference that we had last year in Moscow, and we were unfortunate not to have him. I am so happy that we have him with us today and to listen very closely to his outstanding presentation. I will welcome you more in my closing remarks, but I just wanted to say this now. I have only two comments for Mr. Hirschfeld. One was responded to in part by my brother Nabil Shaath, but let me just say it more clearly. Mr. Hirschfeld said no Israeli government will evacuate 20,000 people from the settlements. 20,000 families. 20,000 families or 10,000 families, whatever you want. You said that. 20,000 families, yes. But the question is not that. Nobody is raising the question of evacuating 20,000 families or 10,000 families or 5,000 families. The question that has been raised by the international community and by us, and unanimously, that if we want to open doors for peace, stop all settlement activities now. And through negotiation, we will see how we can deal with this monster. So I think for the fairness of the discussion and for the objectivity of the discussion, we need to say accurate things. The accurate thing is what we are saying: let's stop the settlement activities in all form and shape now. And I think it would be very useful when you respond to my remark is to tell us, is that possible and doable? Because if you tell us that it is not possible, then forget about opening doors for peace. If you tell us, as the distinguished professor said accurately and precisely, that the objectives of settlements is not to allow the state of Palestine to take place. If we manage to succeed in stopping settlement activities in all form and shape, then we will become serious in trying to save the two-state solution. So your position in this regard, I think, would be useful. The second comment related to you, you said that we hold the keys as Palestinians to the Arab world, and you want us to open the door for Israel in the Arab world. We gave a remarkable gift to Israel, and I want you to respond to it. And that gift, we played a significant role. One of our brothers is Nabil Shaath, was in the kitchen in the articulation of the Arab Peace Initiative. The distinguished professor again said it is our collective responsibility in this meeting to endorse and support the Arab Peace Initiative. What else do you want from us? What is the position of Israel, the government of Israel, vis-a-vis the Arab Peace Initiative? We are saying this is a good initiative to have peace between us and the Israelis, the Arabs and the Israelis, the Muslim countries and the Israelis, because it has been adopted by a ministerial meeting of the OIC. What you need to tell us, what are you doing with the Israeli government to endorse the Arab Peace Initiative? As the distinguished professor asked us, it is the duty of all forces in Israel to get the government to accept the Arab Peace Initiative, and it is the duty of everyone. And when I make my concluding remarks, I will dwell on this issue of what needs to be done vis-a-vis the Arab Peace Initiative. I'd like really to hear from you what your group and you is doing with the Israeli government to endorse the Arab Peace Initiative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I would like to give the floor to the left side of the NGO. Sorry?
South Africa.
Yeah, after that. They took first.
Hello. Good afternoon, esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for your contributions today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me the floor. My name is Hannah Barano, and I come as a representation of Youth with a Mission. We are a faith-based NGO focused on the empowerment of youth, family, and communities around the globe. One of our values as a Christian organization is for peace and reconciliation. So I thank you so much for inviting us here today. The resolution and the conflict between Israel and Palestine is proving to be a slow and painful process, as we have heard these past 2 days. As a multi-platform NGO, which include working with refugees, humanitarian aid, and advocacy, we have seen the difficulties. We have been to the refugee camps, and the Palestinians are denied their rights on a daily basis, and Israel is not in peace. As the largest mission organization in the world with 25,000 volunteers working primarily with youth, We work in areas in the Middle East, including Lebanon and Jordan, with Palestinian refugee camps there. At the moment, our NGO is blacklisted by the Israel government, and the Israeli Ministry of Social Affairs has not approved any new NGOs for the 3 years working in humanitarian aid. There are several international organizations who have applied for registration so that they can do humanitarian work amongst the Palestinians in the West Bank, and not one new registration has been approved for 3 years. So this provides a problem with visas and for volunteers that want to work there. So in spite of this, we continue. I believe that as an international community attempts to make a just and fair peace on both sides, civil society has even a greater role to see this actually happen. The international community can impose sanctions, reward good behavior for both parties, and as one of our panelists stated yesterday, try to build trust through confidence exercises. But this is not enough. A two-state solution can give everyone what they want, but it can also further alienate Israel from its neighbors and leave Palestine vulnerable to extremism. This is the worst-case scenario, of course. And as a representative of a youth organization, I believe that all these initiatives have to be enacted by the youth. And so I want to ask the